John Clayton, the Washington Post, the haves and have-nots are starting to form. It's historically bad in the NFC East. It's real bad across the league, as I think John's article says 11 teams have either one or no wins on the season. And John, have you remember a league where the haves and have-nots, the gap has been so big like we're seeing in 2020?
I can't imagine it this bad. I mean, this is the worst that I've seen, because, I mean, I have to go off memory right now, but what the records of the worst teams is like 15, 34, and 2. And it's like, what are we talking about here? And you can see it week in and week out how it's affecting. Like, you look for the NFC East right now, 2-15-1, worst we've ever seen. And now the chances are that whoever wins this division, whether it's going to be Dallas or Philadelphia, might be able to win it with 6, and it might actually be less. They can be with 11 losses or so and win a division like this. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. But then you look, for example, okay, here's the Rams. Rams are 4-2. You're thinking, they're 4-1 going into the San Francisco game, looking pretty good. But they won the NFC East by winning the 4 games against the NFC East. Their defense ranked 6th or 7th in the league. And then, the one game that they played, there was a non-division game, was Buffalo. They were down 23-3 in that game and had to fight to come back, and almost did. Then, of course, they get pretty dominated by San Francisco. So it's like, how good are they? And so there's so many bad teams right now that all they're going to do is feed the teams. And we've seen this. And again, being Dick Vermeil fan and having him educate me through the years, he was always big on the idea that, you can go 500 against winning teams. Just don't play a lot of them. Like, for example, if you go 3-3 against teams with winning records and go 10-0 against the losing teams, which you think you should, then you have a great chance to be a number 1 seed and go to the Super Bowl. And that, more than anything else, is, I think, dictating things. Because you remember the Super Bowl year that Dick had down in St. Louis. They had, I think, a 363 schedule, which was one of the easiest in NFL history. And so, schedule means everything, and right now more so this year than any other.
Okay, so you mentioned the schedule. You're out in Seattle. You know that NFC West is very difficult. The AFC North with Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Cleveland is also a very good one. So are the NFC East just a victim of a bad schedule, or are they bad football teams?
I'd say bad football teams right now. And again, the talent. Well, let's put it this way: there's 2 teams that we all thought would have a chance to do well. And for whatever reason, in both cases, Dallas and Philadelphia have been bludgeoned by injuries, and that clearly has to affect them. I mean, and now you've seen in Dallas the same thing that you've been watching with the Eagles the last couple of weeks. They finished up the game down 4 offensive line starters in the game last week, and so that's weakened them. And of course, they've had injuries on defense. 2 linebackers that have been out. I mean, it's Dallas, Philadelphia, San Francisco that have really had the worst of the injuries. But, of course, now I don't think I've seen a unit on offense as obliterated as what we're going to see tomorrow night when the Eagles go on the field against the Giants. I mean, who's left? I mean, the top 3 receivers, we'll see about Rieger being able to play, the top 2 tight ends, the starting running back, 3 offensive line starters, and then, of course, Jason Peters, who, of course, was going to be a starter to fill in, all out. It's incredible.
Yeah, Deshaun Jackson is going to play, it looks like, tomorrow. No Alshon Jeffrey. You mentioned Rieger. No Goddard. No Ertz. So it is going to be crazy. Let me ask you about, okay, these teams have been bludgeoned by injuries. So we've seen Dallas defensively. Is Dallas as bad as they look? Should we buy in? If you're Eagles fans listening, should you buy in that this Dallas team is bad for the long haul this year?
Looks like it, because and now you're starting to hear the players talk to different people from the media, particularly at the NFL Network, and leaking out anonymously. They think it's all into coaching. Now, what we're seeing on defense, and I think you have to put something on Mike Nolan for this. He comes in, and you've watched Dallas. I mean, they're a pure kind of like the Eagles, a pure 4-3 team. They've been drafting that way. That's what they want to do when they sign free agents. They want a 4-3 defense, and that's been their talent base. But Nolan comes in, and he tries to change to a hybrid 3-4-4-3. Okay, he puts in more complications because one of the great advantages of a 4-3 defense, and Jim Schwartz is excellent in this, Pete Carroll's excellent in this, you make it simple. You don't make it to the point where you have to constantly think. I mean, you want to react, and get to better plays. All right, so now here he puts in all of these thinking parts. The communication has been a mess. The talent base has been a mess. They've got the worst defensive tackle situation for whatever reason that is in the league right now, and they're just genuinely bad. And so something has to give. Now, clearly, it's not going to be the firing of Mike McCarthy, who I like a lot. I mean, he's got a 4-year, $47.5 million contract based on my sources. And so at $9.5 million a year, he's not getting fired. But something has to be done with that defense because, again, this is a team that started the season with 15 players who had been to the Pro Bowl. They are right now awful.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I was thinking, could they move on from the head coach? Is that crazy? And I would think that it would be very quick to pull the trigger on him after hearing the rumors. But to tie this back to Philadelphia, when you think about Doug Peterson, it seems like over the last handful of years, they were really down, their backs were against the wall, and then they rally. And it seems like, you're seeing a situation where the Dallas Cowboys internally are becoming a mess, while Doug Peterson does stress me out at times with certain play calls and things of that nature on the field. There is something to be said about how good he is when things are tough inside a locker room. Those guys will not quit on him.
Yeah, and I think that's the advantage that he has being an ex-player because I think he knows, what the feel of that is and how to adjust to it. Plus, he's a very good coach. That's the one thing that I think, does. I think Mike McCarthy's a very good coach, but I think, Doug is prepared to do that. And that's why, for example, I never, ever bought into the constant criticism of Carson Wentz because, you watched it last year. He had nothing at the wide receiver position, and yet he was still able to make the shorter throws, do the right things, and get the team into the playoffs. And now this year, certainly he's affected by the offensive line injuries, 8 sacks in the first game. And I think you can see that, not that he has happy feet, but he has, he does have to adjust now to the hits that he's taken. And, of course, who's he throwing to? I never thought that Alshon Jeffrey was going to step on the field and play. We'll see if he does this year because he's been so injured and looked so slow last year. So I still wonder about that. It's good that Jackson's coming back because they need his speed, but they need something to happen positive because, can you go with the Greg Wards and the unknown guys and think that you're going to be able to be as successful as they should be?
John Clayton, you mentioned the haves and have-nots, but you think Dallas could benefit from the haves and have-nots.
Well, here's why, because, and I let's put it this way, this was written before the game on Monday night, and so it's like, I didn't think they were going to be as bad as they were, but they were. But what I'm looking at is that, okay, I still think Andy Dalton has something left. And, again, with the 4 offensive linemen done and the blitzing that was done by Vance Joseph of the Arizona Cardinals, they just got caught up like you've seen the Eagles get caught up with the problems there. He had to throw 57 passes and he had to drop back 60 times to throw. And so, he's going to get sacked 3 times. And I still think that with the haves and have-not schedules, particularly in the division, because the question is going to be, there's only 2 teams that have a chance to win these division games. It's Dallas and Philadelphia. Okay, so now if Dallas can split against Philadelphia, win the 2 games against the Washington football team and also the Giants, which they've already won the road game against them, and be 5-1, in the division, then they have a chance to win 6 games. The Eagles have the same opportunity to do the same thing, but the killer was that loss to the tie with the Cincinnati Bengals because that should have been a win. And so now that puts them a little bit behind Dallas. But it's a 2-way race. The problem is the race is with, we're not going with sports cars. We're kind of going, with maybe bikes.
John Clayton, the Washington Post, he's got a great story up on the haves and have-nots right now. And one of the interesting things you bring up is Tampa Bay and Seattle. Both those teams, I think people think are pretty good teams, but they're also the benefit of playing a schedule that could really put them in another stratosphere record-wise.
Yeah, and again, this happens, in so many years. If you have the easy schedule, like, for example, if you look at this entire Seattle schedule, it's 4-0-4 based on the records this year. That's the easiest in football. Now, again, the tough part for them, they're in one of the toughest divisions because the AFC North and the NFC West are the 2 best divisions in football. But the key is, and they'll find out over the next 5 weeks, with 4 games in the division if they have a chance to go 4-2, because they're already 5-0 in non-division games, and their non-division games for the most part get easier, because the only tough ones you look down the stretch would be going to Buffalo in a couple weeks, and then if Philadelphia is going to be good or not, because the Redskins, the Washington football team, the New York Giants and the New York Jets, those are winnable games, and so they have the chance to go 8-2 and 9-1 in non-division games, and if you go 4-2 in a division, they're 13-2. Tampa's schedule isn't as easy, but is still one of the 3 or 4 with remaining games, one of the easiest in football. So they can take advantage of that. So again, that's where the haves, and that's where it's going to take the stakes of the playoffs, except in the NFC East, so high. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me that you can have an 11-win season in NFC, because I know I went on 538 and saw that they had 3 teams in the NFC going 12-4, that you can win 11 games and not make the playoffs.
Speaking of easy schedules, how about the Cleveland Browns? Because when you think about it, Baltimore Ravens, Pittsburgh, they're going to be battling out for the top spot. Can Cleveland still make the postseason?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, because of the easy schedule. You can see that they're not to the standards of Pittsburgh or Baltimore because they got blown out in both of those games. But they're sitting there with a 4-2 record, and their closing schedule is pretty easy. And really, when you start the season, this is based on last year's records, that the AFC North had one of the easiest schedules in football. And so they get the benefit of playing AFC East teams, with the exception of Baltimore and possibly New England. Those are winnable games, and so that helps them out. And they still have the games against the Cincinnati Bengals, and that helps them out. So I think right now they have a great chance to win 10 games and be the third, the wild card along with the Las Vegas Raiders. And because, again, their schedule isn't that tough either. And, again, so Cleveland benefits from the schedule and the fact that without Nick Chubb, they still have 5 players on offense that went to the Pro Bowl, have been to the Pro Bowl, and 4 on defense. They still have talent, and they're still reasonably healthy.
The NFC East on display tomorrow night right here on 97.3 ESPN. The Eagles and the Giants. I mean, do you give the Giants or Washington any puncher's chance in this division, or do you still think it's mainly a 2-team race?
I think it's a 2-team race, because all you see from Daniel Jones is the turnovers. You're seeing the turnovers from Carson Wentz because of all the injuries and all the problems there, and not being able to set up and do the passing that he has done in the past. So I think it's a 2-way race right now. But again, any one of these teams. I mean, right now it's because again, if the stakes are only going to be 4 to 6 wins, then anything can happen. And really, what it comes down to is who wins the division games. I mean, it took Dallas a 3-point win and giving up 27 points against a Giant team that's one of the lowest scoring teams in football to win that one, because they gave up 27 points in a 30-27 win. And so now, I mean, really, the division games are going to dictate where it's going to be. So whoever has the best team in the division probably is going to win the division.
That's true. I think if Philly wins out the division and gets them to 6 wins, 6-9-1, might just be good enough. And then, of course, John, you're going to hear people saying they got to redo the playoffs, that the division winners shouldn't get that automatic berth.
No, and I mean, see if you appreciate this, because, again, being in South Jersey, I mean, you're pretty well in the NFC East. And so it's like, if you change that format, right, you take away the power of division games, right? And here's the power of division games. And we all agree that this is the worst division in NFL history. And there may never be one that's going to be as bad as this. But what happened when the Dallas Cowboys played the New York Giants? It was one of the highest rated football games in the last 5 years. Think about that.
Yeah.
Over 21 million people watched that game, and they're bad teams. And so the power of the division games, and it's never more apparent in the NFC East, because that's the most watched division in football, good, bad, or indifferent. And so here you have, 5 wins total in this division, only because 3 of them have been in division games. And, what you're seeing is that was the second highest rated game this year, and over 21 million people watched it.
Yeah, that's a good point. The NFC East has the biggest markets: New York, Philly, Dallas, Washington. They do not want to lose one of those teams getting in for the viewership. John Clayton, the Washington Post. Check out the full article about the haves and the have-nots. There's some other teams that he mentions in there as well. And, of course, he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Thank you so much, John.
Okay, thanks.
All right, always great to catch up with John. Such great insight. But you think about that, too. From a business perspective, there's no way the NFL wants Philly, New York, Washington, or Dallas's market out of the playoffs.